Good morning. It is a beautiful early morning here on the East Coast of the United States. So I'm excited to be here and hope that some of you early birds are up and able to join us this morning. And if not, the video will remain available for you to watch at your convenience. For those of you who don't know me, I am Marcy Thomas. I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective and the BGC Book Club. And I'm super excited this morning or this afternoon to come to you and be able to share one of our international sisters and her latest book, What White People Can Do Next, From Allyship to Coalition. Our special guest today is Emma Dabari, who is a regular presenter on BBC and contributor for The Guardian. She is a teaching fellow in the Africa department at SOAS and a visual sociology PhD researcher at Goldsmiths. Her writing has been published in a number of anthologies, academic journals, and the national press. You may know her previously as the author of Twister, The Tangled History of Black Hair Culture, but what we're going to be discussing today is her new book, What White People Can Do Next, From Allyship to Coalition. So without any further delay, we'd like to welcome our special guest this morning or afternoon, whenever you may be watching, Emma Dabiri. So welcome.
Hi, so happy to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yes, absolutely. As I was telling you earlier, when your team reached out, I'm like, oh, yes, I definitely would like to meet you to hear some about your story. And I do have a copy of the book here. Oops, backwards, upside down. I have had a chance to read it, and it's a good read and a lot of information in there. So I definitely am glad that you're able to join us today.
Thank you so much. It's always so interesting seeing the different editions, because the edition in the UK and Ireland looks so different. This is our cover.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a very different vibe, I think. Obviously, it's the same content inside, but the
right. And now that in and of itself is interesting. It's like yours is like pretty flowers, and this is just kind of like bam.
Yeah, so this reminds me more of like it makes me think of, so my first degree was in African studies, and I was doing that like in the late 90s, and we did like we had a lot of 1970s like pan-African texts, and that cover reminds me more of that of that kind of, yeah, like pan-African writing. So yeah, a very, very different aesthetic.
Very different aesthetic, which is interesting in and of itself. So of course you have been involved in a lot of things and celebrating and speaking to our culture, of course. But in the last year, both here and around the world, we've seen a lot of things happen. We're talking about race, and racial matters have really become, I guess, more in vogue for the general public to do it. So what was it about this particular time or experience that made you want to go ahead and put this particular work out into the universe?
Yeah, great question, because it was actually like very unexpected. Like, I didn't plan on writing this book. It was very responsive to the time. With that being said, it was drawing on a lot of like the ideas and work in there, especially stuff to like a lot of the ideas or a lot of the research is from my doctoral research, from my PhD. So ideas that I've been thinking about, or kind of theories that I've been thinking about for a long time, but then actually applying them to a very specific moment in time, and just making them like, really, really topical. And like I said, I hadn't planned on writing another book so quickly. My first book had just the paperback had just come out. I'm losing track of the years with this lockdown.
Yeah, the pandemic.
I'm like, what is happening?
Like we lost a year almost.
I know. I still feel really disoriented. But yes, the paperback of my book only came out in 2020, in March of 2020. And then by and in the States, I think the book only was published in 2020, and then by kind of 4 or 5 months, 3 or 4 months later into the year, I'm starting work on my second book, which hadn't been the plan. But really, I felt that we were in the aftermath of the killing, the murder of George Floyd. I saw conversations that had started to, pick up momentum, in large part through to the efforts of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. Conversations that had started to pick up momentum, just becoming like really turbocharged and happening. Anti-racism kind of becoming the word of the moment and becoming this really mainstream, almost zeitgeisty idea. And I thought that was like, a historic opportunity to bring about change that is so desperately overdue and required. But I also felt that the way a lot of the conversation was happening on social media, and bearing in mind we were more reliant on social media than ever before, right, given that we were in the pandemic, and so it was taking up it had even more emphasis than it had previously. I felt a lot of the framework, specifically around allyship and even our understanding of anti-racism, that I was seeing expressed through social media was actually could be more expansive and could articulate what it is demanding more clearly, and could use different frameworks. And I felt that a lot of the social media conversations seemed to be untethered from strategic thinking, or really from a lot of organizing of the past. So we have kind of names and concepts from previous historical times where race has been high on the agenda, but it's like those people, those activists and their ideas are kind of untethered from the radical environments in which they were generated, and we have these quite reductive interpretations of I think of their work. So the book was kind of an intervention into that.
Right, and it definitely does a really good job of, what I love about it is you talk about what was happening before, you talk about what's happening now, and it just gives people a good overview of even how this construct of race even came about. What was it that made us even go to this space where race is an issue? So talk a little bit about that, because a lot of people just think that race is what you are. You're black, you're white, you're whatever it is that you are. But we know that historically that hasn't always been the case. This was something that was created or formulated for a specific reason.
Yes, absolutely. So when anti-racism is so high on the agenda, becomes so mainstream, it seems to me that there can't be that much, we can't have this much focus and emphasis on anti-racism without also really fully understanding and grappling with race itself, and really understanding the ways in which it is a social construct, and having a familiarity with the invention of the white race, why the idea of a white race of people was created and was codified into law and legislation, the historical period that happened in, and the purpose that it served. And like you say, these are ideas that I only came to understand, myself through studying, through studying like sociology, and being in university. I also had just thought, that race was just what you are, and it was like it has had this biological truth status attached to it. But if we go back to the historical period where this idea of a white race and subsequently a black race is invented, it's really recent. I think it's very shocking to people how historically recent it is. It's from the 17th century. And I think what is key is that it's invented by slave owners, So the first time that we see the idea of a white race in law, and the subsequent privileges and opportunities that become available to people racialized as white and denied to people who become racialized as black, and to indigenous people where these laws are happening, is in the English colony. So it's an English innovation, but it's not the English in England. It's English men, elite, like lawmakers and landowners, slave owners, in Barbados. Is the first kind of instance we see of whiteness in this way. From Barbados, it spreads to Jamaica and then to Virginia in what will become the United States. And from there, sets of slave laws, slave codes that further enshrine human rights, essentially, for people who are racialized as white and deny them to people who are racialized as black, starts to come about. And what's really interesting about that historical period is the rationale behind introducing these concepts is to, first of all, justify the brutal exploitation of black people, of African people and people of African descent, that these economies and Western economies more generally are becoming increasingly dependent on. So it's in this period that the notions that we still have about whiteness and blackness are first created. These very enduring notions, these associations of whiteness, just with innocence and purity and just intelligence and superiority, and then by extension, this notion of an inherent inferiority being associated with blackness. And that is something that is socially engineered and constructed to justify the enslavement of black people, as setting this up as a natural order. Of course, white people are lords and masters of everybody else. They're inherently and biologically superior. That's the primary motivation in this creation. But the second one that's really interesting as well, both in Barbados and in Virginia, these laws are enacted. These slave codes are enacted after we've seen instances where in Barbados, indentured Irish and enslaved Africans have come together to fight their English and Scottish, sometimes landlords, who they see as a common enemy. Similarly, in Virginia, we have indentured English laborers and enslaved Africans coming together to fight English landlords, who they also see as a common enemy. What the idea of whiteness does is to shut down those coalitions emerging in future, because the indentured laborer is brought into the category of whiteness, given far more rights. Well, given rights, they're just completely denied to people of African descent. And there's kind of this carrot dangled, that, oh, you're a white person and you can also achieve all of these things that the richer kind of white elites have. And so people who are now racialized as white, even ones who are on the lower rungs of society, really start to see their allegiances with other white people, even those who are also exploitative of them, and become effectively lord and masters over black people who they might have had similar social conditions to, previously. So that's where the idea of a black race and a white race comes from, So I think when we have a anti-racist movement, sorry, the sun is chasing.
Yeah, the sun. Yeah. For those of you who may not realize, it's 1:00 in the afternoon where it is over in London. So yeah, the sun is high.
let me just move
right now.
And
thank you for those of you who are here. I'm so glad to see some people early in the morning.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you so much. For those of you who are joining us early in the morning. But yes, I just found given that history is just so powerful to understand that, because we see how it continues to play out through, throughout time, how it's continuing to play out now. We know, here in the United States, that a lot of times people will say, oh, they vote a certain way, or they do things in a certain way, and sometimes it might be against their own interests.
Yes.
They may have more in common with Black people, or people that they think are quote unquote minorities. They may have more in common with us, but they are, because they are put into this category of being white, they sometimes will vote against even their own best interests.
Absolutely. So race was invented. One of the kind of primary reasons it was invented was to do that work. So it continues to do that work that it has done so effectively since the 17th century, And one of the limitations I felt of the current anti-racist moment was that sometimes it doubles down on those those racial categories as being, biologically true. Even speaking to white people, one of the things that I do in the book is say, okay, so there are people in America who are racialized as white. There are people in England who are racialized as white. There are people in Ireland who are racialized as white. They're the three main geographical sites that I'm looking at. But the white Americans' relationship to whiteness and their investment in whiteness is not exactly the same as a white Irish person in Ireland's relationship to whiteness and investment in whiteness, and the same with the UK. And what we often do in this part of the world is we cut and paste the situation in America onto our situation here. And so we lose sight of the geographical specificities and the historical differences, between Ireland and the UK and America. And the situation in America is one where, it's a settler colony that is founded on the genocide of the indigenous population and then is built on the enslaved labor of Africans and their descendants, the as yet unremunerated labor. So while a lot of this was created by Englishmen in America, it's still a different situation to the situation in England, where most of the Black population is a migrant population. Of course, they are often migrants from former British, from countries that have been colonized by Britain and brutalized and destroyed by Britain. But it's a different history, and the specificities of it are different, and we need to attend to those specificities rather than just cut and pasting from the United States, which I think we do a lot here. And so one of the things that I'm looking at is that thinking about when we're talking to white people, this generic category of whiteness, it was created to actually. So before people in Barbados or Virginia became racialized as white, it was quite a motley crew of people that didn't have any sense of themselves as having a shared identity. It's everything from very wealthy landlords to felons, Irish people, English people, Scottish people. They don't see themselves as unified. What whiteness does is create this sense of a unified identity that has been wielded, so detrimentally for Black people, for minoritized people, for the world. And I think something that is quite powerful is looking at how it's an invented category, how it's a generic category that was created to consolidate capital, and looking for those points of tension where rather than speaking to white people across the globe as though they're all the same, actually looking for those points of weakness, in whiteness. And I felt that was quite lacking in the current anti-racist conversation, especially when you look at it in a global. I'm looking at it in a global way, because of course I'm writing from outside of America in a context where we, as I say, we look to America and we just kind of import a lot of the reality of America to our own conversations. So I'm looking at it from outside America and how these conversations are happening in a global way, paying, I guess, specific attention to Ireland and the UK.
Right. And just along that line, just give people a little background, because even though you're currently living outside of the United States, you have spent time in the United States, you have some Irish ancestry. So just so people get a context of who you are and kind of where you're coming from, how does she know about these things? There's a
yeah. So my background is, oh gosh, okay, so my mum is like white Irish, but actually born and raised in the Caribbean, in Trinidad. So my dad then is Nigerian. I was born in Ireland, but almost as soon as I was born, like as a newborn, we moved to Atlanta, where I know you are now, one of my favorite cities, because my dad was studying at Morehouse. So while he was there, we lived in the States, and then a lot of his family members married Americans, and so I used to spend after we moved back to Ireland, after we left Atlanta, I used to spend my summers in Atlanta as a teenager, like growing up. So it's a city that I have, quite a lot of familiarity with and a lot of affection for. And something that I write about actually in my first book is the culture shock of, going from Atlanta, where I was just in a very kind of salubrious Black world, the culture shock of going from that to Ireland in the 1980s, where I was moved to inner city Dublin, which was actually like very poor. Ireland was a very poor country in the 1980s, and was just incredibly white, like 99.9% white at that time. Wow. Before there had been any kind of migration there. It's less white now. And how much I missed Atlanta. And then when I used to go back as a teenager, I was just like, oh my God, why did we ever leave here? And actually I tried to go to Spelman.
Wow.
And I got in and everything, but then I couldn't afford the international student fees. I came to London. To London. So I've lived in London since university.
Okay.
But yeah, that's my relationship to the States and to Ireland and to the UK, where I've been for like the past 20 years.
Right, and we have a nice comment from Shiraz. I hope I'm not saying that incorrectly. Really important conversation to have. Thank you for standing on the lines to illuminate the still said or still holding up these falsehoods. Yes, absolutely. 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 And that's why, I felt that it was a very important conversation to have and to let you guys know about the book. I'm putting it up again. Make sure you grab a copy and read it and share it with others, because it's just important. And one of the other reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because recently I had a situation. Of course, I run Brown Girl Collective, and I do have a day job. And I had a coworker, once she found out that I did Brown Girl Collective and, the books and the Black authors and just the things that I'm into, she was like, oh, well, we need to sit down and let's go to lunch and let's have a conversation, because I'm not so sure what to do, or, what should I do? How can I help? And I'm just thinking, oh, Lord, now you're the poster child for how to educate you on how to talk to or, deal with the things that are going on with Black people in America. So I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And it's funny how sometimes people will expect us to do that labor.
Yes. Yeah.
And it is a labor. Sometimes you don't want to do that labor, so, I appreciate people like you who write the books.
Yeah, so I will write the books and I will have these conversations, in a kind of official space, but it's like, it's unlikely at this stage that I probably wouldn't kind of break it down to a white person. I'm not going to do that kind of individual one-on-one labor anymore. I've spent years doing that, and it's too exhausting for me anymore. But people are more than welcome to read my books.
Absolutely.
But actually, that's another interesting thing that you're saying, because one of the reasons I wrote the book as well was because I did actually want to give people some kind of, concrete ideas about like what can and needs to happen, and what they can do in an accessible way. And one of the things that I kind of was thinking about, that I found quite limiting online, was this almost fetishization of interpersonal privileges, which seems to have replaced. So a lot of the organizing that I think about in the past, I use examples from the Black Panthers, I use examples from the Combahee River Collective, from all of these Black American movements where the people involved in them were revolutionary socialists, or were Marxists, were people that were concerned with collective liberation rather than individual, or the movements actually were more kind of, defined by collective liberation than individual advancement, or kind of, being an influencer, or kind of, that type of thing. And I was thinking about the kind of individualist approach of now, in contrast to the collective aims of a lot of the that I find inspiring. And this almost fetishization of interpersonal privilege, and how society is obviously like grossly unequal. And that's actually one of the points I make in the book as well. It's difficult, like it's unequal it's grossly unequal in the UK, but that is even more entrenched in the United States, and in the United States, there is a different history to the one that we have here. Even after emancipation, you've got Jim Crow, you've got segregation that is only officially dismantled like in the late 1960s. You've got policies like redlining. You've got all of these, structural laws and policies that have actually, locked Black Americans out of opportunity and intergenerational wealth creation. And it is more entrenched than it is in the UK or in Ireland, which is, again, not to say that there isn't structural racism in the UK. Right. There very much is, but it shows up differently to the United States, But because I'm speaking to you and we're talking about America, this not obsession, but overemphasis with interpersonal privilege cannot bring about the necessary redistribution of resources that is required. So one of the things that one of the chapters in the book is like, redistribute resources. And so it's looking at things, it's looking at policies, it's looking at ways in which society can be made more equal, that exist beyond this idea of two people online just kind of having an interpersonal grievance about privilege. We have to be thinking in a more structural way than that. So I talk about things like universal basic income, reparations, different ways that resources can be redistributed, and the way that wealth is accumulated and hoarded by certain groups in society, who tend to be white people. While not all white people have access, while not all white people will have access to that level of wealth, the people who do have that access to that level of wealth are 9 times out of 10, if not more, are white people. Right. So it's looking at redistributive policies in on that level, rather than only thinking about checking our privilege on an interpersonal level.
Right. And we have a question from Miss Thomas, probably my cousin since I'm a Thomas. So it's absolutely exhausting to have the burden of educating individuals, particularly those that haven't done any work to educate themselves. And you talk about that. Can you talk about how different audiences might find value in the book? That's a good question. Good question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's been really interesting because obviously the book is called What White People Can Do Next. However, it is I chose that title in kind of a clickbaity way, kind of like by page 6 I actually talk about the limitations with talking, with kind of trying to create an instruction manual for this global generic kind of concept of white people. But I've been really happy by how well the book has been received by Black people as well, because there's a lot of most of the scholars and thinkers that I draw on, if not all, the entirety of the theoretical kind of frameworks that I'm drawing on are Black scholars, many of whom are Black American scholars. I would say that like my work is rooted really in the Black radical tradition. So I think bringing a lot of those more radical ideas to the mainstream anti-racist conversation is something that is valuable for all of us to engage with. I think for white people there are things in the book that are more specifically, there's a chapter that's like pull people up on racism, and that chapter is kind of more specifically directed, at white people that want to be involved in anti-racism. But there is other stuff in there that's more kind of theoretical, that's about identity, that's about subjectivity. That is my background as well, is in African studies. I taught African studies for a long time at SOAS. So I'm drawing on some kind of, African like philosophical concepts in there as well, which I think are really valuable to Black audiences as well, so for all of us. So I've been interested in the way the things in the book that different audiences have felt speak very specifically to them. I've also been interested in how well the book has done in Ireland. I hadn't necessarily anticipated that. It was a bestseller there for weeks. So I have a whole section on that kind of tension between, which I'm interested in, the tension between Ireland as a former colony, that was under the boot of British colonialism for 800 years, and the reality of the Irish in America, and how particularly the Irish that came to America fleeing the famine in Ireland in the 1850s, which is such an important part of Irish history, how invested they very quickly became in white supremacy, and how they moved through the ranks at the expense and subjugation of Black Americans who you might have thought there would be a natural sympathy with, given what the Irish were fleeing from in their home country as a result of British imperialism. So I'm really interested in that tension between of the Irish as both oppressed and oppressor, and that's also something that's in the book. So I think for different white people will I guess relate to the information in that book in different ways as well.
And one of the things that I, really like, kind of going back to what the subtitle, From Allyship to Coalition, in the book, you talk a lot about that, we've touched on it, how a lot of times we are dealing with a lot of the same issues, but we use race as the thing to make it seem like we're not.
Yes.
So, and allyship has been a really big buzzword. Like, oh, we want you to be our ally. We want you to come over here and stand with us and help us, almost help us
Yeah.
to a certain extent. So, just talk a little bit about that, because it's almost like you're looking for white people to come in and be the white saviors, as they say, as you say, versus let's come together and work together on the things that we all need to try to make better in this world.
Exactly. So allyship was the way I was seeing the relationship between the ally and the victim. I was reading about the ally and the victim, the dynamic that exists within framing it in that way is one that I feel deeply uncomfortable with, and one that I think activates a particular type of person who is probably already inclined towards white saviorism, you know. And I felt really uncomfortable with the some slightly patronizing attitudes that I was encountering in the literature around allyship, and also the kind of like self-flagellating and guilt-ridden responses from potential allies in a way that kind of often prevents them from doing, or their motivation for doing the work actually comes from a place of trying to make themselves feel better, or some type of self-improvement program, rather than actually fully engaging with the fact that whiteness as so beyond people who are racialized as white, when you take it back to that historical period when whiteness is invented, it goes hand in hand with capitalism. So capitalism and race are siblings. The very destructive and exploitative system that we currently live under, that creates that puts only not racialized and minoritized people at risk, and also really diminishes their life opportunities, but also is what is responsible for the types of the relationship that we have to the environment, that is creating the current environmental crisis, finds its origins in the system of capitalism and farming and wealth accumulation and all of this stuff that has its roots in that historical period where race is invented, and with the origins of capitalism. So allyship is far too, it's not expansive enough. It doesn't join the dots between, capitalism and race and the destruction of the biosphere. Rather, it sees different issues as really atomized. So it fails to build the necessary coalitions that are required to really change the system in a more in a broader way. So one of the things I say in the book is that allyship gives charity, or suggests charity at the expense of solidarity. And there's a quote that I take from Fred Moten, the Black American scholar and philosopher, where he says, the coalition emerges out of your recognition that it's as effed up for you as we've already realized that it's effed up for us. And then he goes on to say, I don't need your help. I just need you to recognize that this shit is killing you too, however much more softly, you stupid mother F word. I think he's saying that from a place of affection. But that's so key to me. This idea that like, I don't need your help. I just need you to recognize that this shit is killing you too, however much more softly. You know, the world is in crisis. We need to do things very, very differently, very quickly. We don't have time for this hand-wringing kind of self-flagellation that seems to kind of dominate in the allyship space, you know? And I also want people to feel like that. Also, I think we have to recognize that in human nature, most people will be motivated to act from a place of self-interest. So
Right.
it's about making people see that you're not acting out of a sense of charity or benevolence or white saviorism. You're actually acting from a place of your own self-interest. Save yourself too, you know? Whiteness as a system is destructive for the world, even though it gives material advantages to people racialized as white, and not even all of them, actually.
Right. That's true.
And not even all of them. So many people who are racialized as white also live in extreme poverty, also have their life opportunities diminished by capitalism. That's one of the things that I found, you know, so powerful about Fred Hampton, the Chicago, the leader of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panthers. And I talk about in the book, you know, the Rainbow Coalition that he created and how different that is to our current understandings of allyship, where Fred Hampton he's working with a Puerto Rican group, the Young Lords, and then I think most surprisingly, a white Southern working class group, the Young Patriots, who have the Confederate flag, you know, as their symbol. And while the Young Patriots don't experience racism as white people, they do experience police brutality. They do experience kind of diminished life opportunities as a result of the inequalities perpetuated by capitalism. And Fred Hampton, you know, has the vision to see that he can work in coalition, that the Black Panthers can work in coalition with these groups to create the type of mass movements that bring so many people on board that they cannot be ignored, you know. But the Young Patriots, these groups will be working in coalition with themselves because they've identified shared interests, rather than trying to appeal to the better nature of sympathetic white people. No, also save yourself.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know our time is almost up today since it's early and, and, you know, we've got other things going on. There were some of these comments are a little long, so we can't really put up the whole thing. Frida is saying she's unable to digest a lot of the anti-racist conversations because so few choose to address both the existence and erasure of the Black American Indians. So yes, that is true. You know, we don't oftentimes hear about them. You know, we think of Native Americans in general, but not the fact that there are Blacks that were a part of that community as well. So that is something just to consider. Did you have any thoughts on that, Emma?
No, it's something it's something I would actually love to know more about. I came across an article a few weeks ago, and I must do further reading on this because it's fascinating. And it was actually talking about just Black members of Native American groups, and it was something, and actually the discrimination, the particular intersections of discrimination that they experienced, and I think there's different there's different ways of Black people being members of those groups. Like, I guess some people are mixed, and they have Native, they have Indigenous ancestry and Black ancestry. But then I think there's also, and I may be wrong, this is far from my area of expertise, but I think that there are also people who were enslaved by some Indigenous groups, but then became assimilated into those groups, but that's far from my area of expertise, but very fascinating and not something that you hear enough about.
Right. So thank you for posing that, that thought, Frida. It's something for all of us to look at and explore. My cousin, Miss Thomas, actually, she talks about, she's written a book about embracing natural hair for children.
Oh, brilliant.
And just trying to read the comments, so forgive me. Basically, how can we persist in unifying the children of diaspora and shirk the limiting labels that reinforce the oppression of our natural hair? And then she's just talking about thanking us for the conversation. So yes, we're getting close to time, but I do thank you all for joining us this morning. I am pleasantly pleased to have had a good group of folks on. I guess a lot of people are getting ready for work, or maybe took a day off like I did and have the time to sit in on the conversation. And if you enjoyed the conversation, please do, like it, share it out for those who may have missed it and may, want to have an opportunity to get in on and hear what Emma and I talked about. And once again, I'm putting up the name of the book, showing this is the U.S., what it looks like here in the United States. So be on the lookout for it at your favorite bookseller. Grab a copy. And I do have Emma's information at the bottom on Instagram and Twitter. Are there any other places where people can look for you or find out what you have going on next?
I think that they're the best sites. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us on your Friday afternoon.
Honestly, I've just lost track of the days.
Right.
Like, are you guys still in lockdown?
No. Like people say, Atlanta hasn't been locked down.
Oh,
Ways that it should be, but no, a lot of the restrictions have been lifted. So, we're able to kind of get out and move about and things like that. At least I know we are in this area. I'm pretty sure it's that way most places in the U.S. right now. It's like you can wear a mask. They're saying you should wear a mask if you haven't been vaccinated, but I know that people, there's nothing that you have on you to show that you actually have had a vaccination. So
yeah.
So, but yeah, things are going pretty well. Starting to get back to some semblance of normal here. So
yeah, bring it on, I say.
right, exactly. So once again, I thank you everyone for joining. As I said, like, share, let people know about this wonderful conversation with Emma. And I will definitely stay in touch with you. Actually, I would like to have you come back. We'll figure that out and we can talk about Twisted, because that's an important conversation.
Yes, I would love that. I would love that. And see, when I got on, I still had a twist. I still had a twist.
Right.
I'd forgotten to take it out.
Yeah, grab that right quick. But that's what we do. But that's also an important conversation, and here as well. Like we've got the Crown Act and things like that, trying to allow us to embrace our natural hair more and have it be where people can't discriminate against us because of our natural hair. So. So definitely, Shiraz, be on the lookout for that conversation, because that will tie in with some of the questions that you were asking. So we will figure that out and have Emma come back. So thanks again, everyone.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you, everyone. You have a wonderful day, and we'll see you the next time.
Have a lovely afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, 1 second.